Story 1. The Whistler in the Woods. In the spring of 2025, Evan, a 28-year-old man reeling from a bitter divorce, sought refuge in the quiet town of Cheatham, Alabama. With nowhere else to turn, he settled into his late grandfather's creaky old house, a weathered relic perched on 10 acres of untamed land, encircled by dense, whispering woods. The house, with its sagging porch and frostbitten windows, seemed to carry the weight of decades, its wooden floors groaning underfoot and its walls perpetually chilled, as if mourning its former owner. Evan, desperate for a fresh start, thought the solitude would be a balm for his wounded soul. He was wrong. The first week passed uneventfully. Evan spent his days unpacking dusty boxes and scrubbing away years of neglect, his evenings on the porch with a cold beer, lulled by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of his past life, and for a moment he felt a flicker of peace. But on the seventh night, as he lay in bed, teetering on the edge of sleep, a sound pierced the stillness, a low, off-key whistle drifting from the woods. It wasn't a tune he knew, just a meandering, broken melody that seemed to wander aimlessly, like a lost soul. At first he dismissed it as a hunter or a wayward neighbor, but the sound lingered, curling around the house like smoke. The next night it returned, closer now, the notes sharper, as if the whistler stood just beyond the tree line. Evan, heart pounding, flicked on the porch light and scanned the yard, but the beam revealed nothing but swaying branches. Armed with a flashlight, he ventured outside, his boots crunching on the gravel, but found no tracks, no signs of life. Only the whistle fading deeper into the forest. Night after night, the pattern repeated, always at 1:17 a.m., as precise as a heartbeat. The consistency unnerved him, gnawing at his nerves until he began to suspect someone was toying with him, exploiting his isolation. Desperate for answers, Evan called the sheriff's office. Deputy Harlan, a grizzled veteran with deep-set eyes and a slow drawl, arrived the next morning. As Evan recounted the whistling, Harlan's face darkened. "Your granddaddy used to call about the same thing," he said, his voice low. "Every spring, he'd hear someone whistling out there. We searched but never found a soul. Thought he was just getting old. But now you're hearing it too." The revelation hit Evan like a punch. His grandfather had never mentioned this, and the idea that the same unseen presence had haunted the house decades ago sent a chill down his spine. Harlan advised Evan to lock the doors and stay inside after dark, a precaution Evan took to heart. He fortified the house, wedging chairs under doorknobs and checking windows obsessively, but the whistling grew bolder, closer. One night it came from behind the shed, loud enough to rattle his bones. Peering through the blinds, he saw nothing but shadows. The next night it echoed from the porch, 3 long, deliberate notes followed by silence. Then impossibly, it sounded from beneath the floorboards, as if someone, or something, was in the crawl space, their tunes seeping through the vents. Evan didn't sleep that night, his mind racing with images of an intruder lurking just out of sight. Driven by desperation, he rummaged through the attic and unearthed a box of his grandfather's journals. The pages, yellowed and brittle, chronicled the same eerie phenomenon, whistling every spring, always at night, for over a decade. His grandfather wrote of sitting up with a rifle, convinced someone was watching the house, but he never found proof. The journals hinted at a deeper fear, one that grew after his wife's death when he lived alone. Evan's stomach churned as he realized the whistling only targeted solitary occupants. He called Deputy Harlan again, who read the journals with a furrowed brow. "Be careful, son," he warned. "Don't open that door unless you know who's knocking." That night, Evan sat on the couch, a shotgun across his lap, its weight both comforting and foreign. At 1:17 a.m., the whistling began, not from the woods but from inside the house, echoing down the darkened hallway. His blood ran cold. The sound moved closer, accompanied by the faint creak of floorboards. Gripping the shotgun, Evan shouted, "Who's there?" The whistling stopped. He flicked on the hallway light, revealing nothing but empty air. For 2 days, silence reigned. But Evan's nerves frayed further, his body racked with exhaustion and dread. On the third night, too weary to stay vigilant, he crawled into bed, leaving the hallway light on. At 1:17 a.m., a new sound jolted him awake, not whistling, but knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the back door. He froze, clutching the sheets as the silence stretched. Then a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Another. The light went out. Heart hammering, Evan grabbed the shotgun and stepped into the darkness. At the end of the hall, he saw it, a figure in black, pale face gleaming like bone, staring at him with unblinking eyes. "Don't move!" Evan screamed, his voice cracking. The figure shifted as if to flee. "Stop!" he roared, but the figure darted out of sight, heavy footsteps pounding toward the front door. Evan gave chase, bursting outside and firing a wild shot into the night, the recoil jarring his shoulder. "Don't come back!" he bellowed, his voice swallowed by the woods. The shot's echo lingered as he stumbled back inside, locking the door and fleeing to his truck. He drove to town and slept in the cab, too shaken to return. The next morning, Deputy Harlan found the front door unlocked, confirming Evan's worst fear. The intruder had a key. Nothing was stolen, but Harlan urged him to change the locks and, off the record, to leave the house for good. "Someone out there don't take kindly to you or your granddaddy living here," he said. Evan didn't need convincing. He replaced the locks that day, packed what mattered, and drove to his parents' house out of state, leaving the property to be sold. The mystery of the Whistler, who they were, how they got a key, why they targeted his family, remained unsolved, a shadow that followed him to the city, where he swore never to live in isolation again. Story 2. The Mintfield Mirage. In the summer of 2016, 7-year-old Lila and her best friend Julian roamed the sun-scorched lanes of their tiny village in rural Pennsylvania, a speck of a place with barely 90 souls. The village was a close-knit tapestry of familiar faces, where every car's license plate was known, and children wandered freely, unchecked by hovering parents. For Lila, whose family had moved from the city 2 years prior, the village was a playground of endless adventure, its fields and forests a canvas for her imagination. But on one sweltering afternoon, that innocence nearly led her into darkness. Lila and Julian, parched and craving the fizzy relief of Coca-Cola, scrounged for coins but came up short. Their salvation appeared in the form of Mrs. Harrow, a kindly widow who called them from her porch. Her birthday was approaching, and she planned to brew mint tea for the village. "I'm out of mint," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Fill 2 bags with leaves, and I'll buy you all the soda you can drink." The offer was a godsend, and the children, fueled by the promise of reward, set off with plastic bags in hand, undeterred by the blazing sun. They scoured the village's edges, picking at sparse mint patches, but their bags remained stubbornly half-empty. Sweat-soaked and frustrated, they trudged on, hoping for a miracle. As they neared the outskirts, where the fields gave way to a forested hill, 2 figures emerged from the haze. Tall, lanky teenagers clad in black hoodies and tight jeans, their faces shadowed despite the midday glare. To Lila's young eyes, they loomed like giants, their presence jarring in the familiar landscape. "You kids alone?" one asked, his voice syrupy, almost too friendly. Julian, born and bred in the village, stiffened, his hand tightening on Lila's. He made a subtle gesture to leave, but Lila, oblivious to danger, missed the cue. "We're looking for mint plants," she chirped, explaining their quest. The taller boy crouched to her level, his hand grazing her head in a gesture that felt wrong, proprietary. Julian yanked her back, his face taut with unease. "Who are your parents?" he demanded, invoking the village custom of identifying strangers by lineage. The boys deflected, their smiles thinning, and offered a tantalizing lie. "There's a mint field over that hill. We'll take you." Lila, eager and naive, nodded, ignoring Julian's trembling grip. The boys led them away from the village, their strides confident, their chatter sparse. The hill, a familiar haunt for hide-and-seek, held no mint fields, only corn, grapes, and the occasional watermelon patch. As the village faded from view, a prickle of fear crept up Lila's spine. The forest loomed ahead, its shadows swallowing the path. The boys' vague responses, "You'll see," "Be patient," grew ominous, and Julian's hand shook in hers. Halfway up the hill, with the village out of sight, Lila's instincts screamed. There was no mint field, no miracle patch. The boys' pace slowed, their postures shifting, as if sensing her hesitation. Julian leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Something's wrong with them," he whispered. "Run." The word was a spark. Julian bolted downhill, dragging Lila with him, their feet pounding the earth. Behind them, the boys cursed, their footsteps thundering in pursuit. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she ran, her lungs burning, her mind a blur of terror. The village seemed impossibly far, the forest's edge a distant memory. For nearly 2 kilometers, they sprinted, driven by raw survival instinct. The boys' shouts faded as the village's rooftops came into view, and Lila dared to hope they'd escaped. Mrs. Harrow, spotting their tear-streaked faces, ushered them inside, pressing chocolate into their hands and demanding answers. Julian, voice shaking, recounted the encounter, sparing Lila the blame by claiming he trusted the strangers. Mrs. Harrow's face paled. She scolded Julian fiercely, her worry masking her relief, and sent them home with stern warnings. Julian was grounded for a month while Lila grappled with the trauma, her once carefree wanderings tainted by fear. Years later, as teenagers, Lila and Julian, now a couple, reflected on that day with a shudder. The boys were never identified, their motives a chilling mystery. Lila suspected they'd targeted her innocence, luring her with promises to exploit her trust. Without Julian's quick thinking, she might not have survived to tell the tale, a debt she carried into their shared future. Story 3. The Shadow at the Cabin. In the summer of 2005, 7-year-old Sophie and her 8-year-old brother Cameron were whisked away from their Oklahoma home to their grandparents' cabin in the Texas countryside. Their parents, stretched thin by dual jobs, couldn't afford a summer babysitter after letting their beloved nanny, Michelle, take a well-earned break. The cabin, nestled in a sea of golden fields with woods creeping at its back, promised a season of adventure. For Sophie, the prospect of exploring with Cameron and their grandparents' dog, Cora, was a dream come true. But the dream soon twisted into a nightmare. The journey to Texas was a grueling odyssey for Sophie, the endless highways blurring into a nauseous haze. The cabin, with its weathered logs and tin roof, felt like a storybook haven, complete with a barn housing goats, chickens, and a lone cow. Their grandparents welcomed them with warm hugs, and Grandpa wasted no time showing the kids the property, from the animal pens to the winding trails. That first night, over a hearty dinner, Sophie felt enveloped in love, laughing as Cora nuzzled her hand. She and Cameron bunked in a cozy room with a TV, drifting off to cartoons as their parents, exhausted from the drive, slept next door. At 2 a.m., Sophie woke to heavy footsteps crunching outside her window. The sound was deliberate, human, not the skitter of a raccoon or deer. The blinds blocked her view, and the TV's glow drowned out softer noises. But she heard a grunt, then a faint scrape, as if someone was prying at the window. Heart racing, she ran to her parents' room, shaking them awake. Groggy and skeptical, they checked outside but found nothing, dismissing it as an animal. Sophie, unconvinced but too tired to argue, fell back asleep, the incident lingering like a bad dream. The next morning, as their parents left for Oklahoma, Sophie pushed the fear aside. Grandpa took her and Cameron to feed the animals, handing Sophie Cora's leash with a chuckle. "Hold tight, she's a puller." On the trail, Cora kept stopping, staring into the woods. Annoyed, Sophie followed her gaze and froze. A black-clad figure stood half-hidden behind a tree, hands gripping the bark, watching them. His face was obscured, but his presence was unmistakable, a predator sizing up prey. Sophie tugged Cora and ran to Grandpa, babbling about the man. When they looked back, he was gone, vanished into the trees. Grandpa, concerned but calm, suggested it was a deer, but his tight smile betrayed his unease. That day passed in a blur of sprinklers and movies, but Sophie's nerves hummed with dread. After a feast of Grandma's cooking, she bathed and settled into bed, the TV flickering. At 1 a.m., a new sound woke her, humming, low and deliberate, matching the Cyber Chase theme song playing on the screen. It came from outside the window, too precise to be coincidence. Thinking it might be Grandpa, Sophie called out, "Grandpa!" The humming stopped. Then a voice, eerily like her grandfather's but wrong, too smooth, replied, "Hey, it's Grandpa. Come outside, kid. I've got something cool to show you." Naive and trusting, Sophie slipped on her shoes and stepped into the starlit night. The figure waiting by the window extended a hand, and she took it, following him toward the barn. He wore a hooded sweater, unusual for the warm night, and didn't respond to her questions. Doubt crept in. Why was Grandpa out here? Why the hood? She glanced at his hand, expecting her grandfather's weathered skin, but saw smooth, youthful fingers. Panic surged as she spotted a long handle, an axe tucked into his waistband. Before she could act, her real grandfather's voice called from the house, sharp with worry. The man's head snapped toward the sound, loosening his grip. Sophie yanked free and stumbled back, screaming as he bolted for the woods. She ran to the house where Grandpa enveloped her in a hug, and Grandma dialed the police. Officers swarmed the property, finding the man hiding in a ditch with stolen tools and an axe. He was Dave, Michelle's ex-boyfriend, who'd been stalking Sophie's family, obsessed with using her to manipulate Michelle. The revelation shattered Sophie's sense of safety. Her parents returned early, vowing to find jobs that kept them home. Michelle was let go, a painful but necessary decision. 20 years later, Sophie, now 27, still shuddered at the memory of that night, grateful for her grandfather's timely intervention. The cabin, once a sanctuary, became a symbol of vulnerability, a reminder that danger could lurk even in the heart of family.